Have you ever seen those cartoons where a character is trying to decide what to do and he has two voices, one on each shoulder, one of them telling him a good option, one of them telling him a bad option? Well, that's kind of what we're going to do today. We're going to take a look at good and bad pieces. All chess pieces start out the same. It's up to you to make them good and not bad. Here, if you're the white team, you've already got the rook on the open file. But to make this rook truly a good piece, you want to move him to the 7th rank, because that's where he can capture a bunch of black pawns. The only way black can guard all of his pawns is to move his rook over. But here, every chess master in the world would say that white has a good rook and black has a bad one. Why? Because the white rook is doing more than the black rook. In fact, the white king is going to be a good king, while the black king is stuck on the edge of the board because of the white rook. A really simple plan for white is to walk his king up, and then his king is going to act like a bishop. That's right, he's going to go diagonal, and even though this plan takes a long time, there's not much black can do. If the black king wanders over too far, then he's going to lose the pawns on the king's side. This rook is going to act like Pac-Man and capture all of these pawns. Good rook versus bad rook. Next, we look at 4 examples from real games of good and bad pieces. This game was played by a former student of Fun Master Mike. It's probably the most perfect chess game one of my students has ever played. Take a look at black's army. He's got a knight on the edge of the board. That's not a good piece. But the bigger problem for black is this bishop. We would call this a bad bishop because the bishop is blocked in by his own pawn. That turns out to be the #1 most important thing in the position. Black's light squared bishop is stuck on the queen side. So guess what white does? He attacks on the light squares on the king's side. Watch how almost every attacking move for white lands on a white square. In fact, white gives checkmate in 6 more moves. He starts out by sacrificing on h7, a light square. Then he takes his knight and lands on g5 with check. Okay, that is a dark square, but remember, a knight on a dark square is attacking light squares. The bishop took, so then he took this knight on a light square. He did have to take time out here to get rid of that black bishop, but after takes, it's mate in 2, again on some light squares. Now if that looked really easy, that's because black had a bad bishop. If black's bishop was anywhere over on the king's side to help defend, none of this would happen. Our next example comes to us courtesy of Grandmaster Alyssa Galliamova.
Hello.
You may never have heard from her, but that doesn't mean we're not going to learn from her. In this chess position, white has 2 really good pieces working together, but she's also got kind of a bad one. Look at this bishop on the back row. The bishop is only bad for the moment though. In fact, if we make that bishop from a bad bishop to a good bishop, that's what's going to win us the game. Notice immediate checkmate threats don't work because the king will run away. So, Miss Galliamova has the idea of turning her bad bishop to a good bishop. After bishop f4, can you guess where that bishop's going next? Yep, she's going to go to the square d6. That's going to take away the king's escape square, which means we will be able to give checkmate. Remember, we don't have to worry about the safety of our bishop. If our bishop gets captured, then we can mate in the corner of the board because the knight won't be there. Her opponent realized this and played rook to a6, which stops the idea of bishop d6. But then she played a backup plan. She brought her bishop to e5, which is almost as good. Right in the center of the board, the bishop's pressuring this pawn. Now she's threatening to give check, and when the king moves, she can continue her attack by taking this pawn on the next turn, and that black king is not going to feel very safe having to run to the middle of the chessboard. As you might guess, she went on to win in only a couple more moves. The main reason? She turned her bad piece into a really good one. This next example is a game I played. It's actually the only Fun Master Mike game to ever make it in a chess book that I'm aware of. Here I was black, and I noticed my opponent had a whole bunch of bad pieces. Look at all of these white pieces over on the right side of the chessboard not doing much. There wasn't a way to win those pieces, but as we've seen today, you don't need to win a piece to prove you've got an advantage. Because those pieces are so far away from the white king, it gave me the idea to attack the white king. And I started out by playing the move f4. Black is now about to play the move f3 and really damage white. So white decided to take that pawn, but now I made a sacrifice. Gave away a knight for a couple of pawns, but the problem for white is that my queen's about to come to the square g5, and it's not very easy to stop this pretty straightforward queen and helper mate. Notice if any one of these white pieces was anywhere closer, white might be able to bring one of those into the defense. Now the game went on for a few more moves, but I will tell you that I checked this with a computer and my sacrifice was a good one. I went on to win the game in about 15 more moves, mostly because my opponent's pieces just couldn't get over there to defend quickly enough. Our final example is probably the best one yet. White is Anatoly Karpov, former world champion. Black is Garry Kasparov, also former world champion. And if you were a kid when I was, these two guys practically were playing every single day. I think they played more than 200 games against each other. In this chess position, white's pieces are all on the back row. Karpov's not doing so well. Kasparov has a rook on the second rank. We've already seen the power of that. And he's got a knight right in the middle of the chessboard. White decided to free his pieces. He had to play knight c1. Wow, if ever there was an ugly chess move, that was it. Look at white's army. Every single white piece is on the back row. I've never seen anything like it. The finish to the game is quite cool. Black continues to activate more of his pieces, making them good. He doesn't even worry about the fact that his rook is threatened, and he plays c3. He loses a rook, but then he played c2, forking the rook and the knight. White decided he didn't mind giving up a rook to get rid of that mean pawn, but after takes and takes, Black decides he's got to activate this rook, make it go from a bad piece to a good one, so he offers a queen trade. White pretty much has to accept, but after rook takes, the king moves, and if Black can activate his final piece, if he can make one bad piece a good one, he'll be winning. What is Black's bad piece? Well, I think it's this bishop. It's the only one not doing anything. Black ended the game in one move. Garry Kasparov played knight f2, and White resigned. None of White's pieces are doing anything at all, and if White decides to save the rook, then it's checkmate in a couple of moves. This bishop will dive into the game bishop f5. The king only has a couple of spots to move to, and when he makes a move like king c1, then the rook will invade. Uh-oh. The king would only have one move, and then rook takes knight is checkmate. The final position is 4 good pieces against 3 bad ones, and in fact a really bad one, the king. He got himself checkmated. Let's learn from Kasparov and make all of our pieces good ones.